Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and today we are covering a classic album that inspired this very shirt that I'm wearing, which some people see in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which I was actually, one time someone thought I was being Scott Pilgrim when I actually just liked the shirt. The 1995 album by Smashing Pumpkins, Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness. So Smashing Pumpkins were one of the first bands I ever really got into. I didn't do a deep dive into their discography, but two of their albums, this one and Siamese Dreams, I got really into a couple years ago. And just from a glance, the main thing you can already say about Mellon Collie is that it is gigantic. This thing is over 2 hours in length. It's a double album with a total of 28 songs, none of which are under 2 minutes. These are all monoliths. And it was a bit of a shift from their more dreamier sound in Siamese Dreams to definitely a crunchier and grungier sound that, while it was technically a little cleaner, they did try to throw in a little bit more noise, but not necessarily feedback, just sort of distortion. Now that is the core sound to this album, but the thing is, this album has a lot, and I mean a lot of tracks. And in that amount of time, they do explore different avenues, but the thing is, sometimes I think they delve a little too deep. Now, I'm just gonna get this right out of the way for this review. If you are in love with this album, and if you think any bit of scrutiny against it, you will absolutely hate and it'll ruin your day, stop watching this video, because I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. This album hits, but it also most definitely misses quite a bit too. And honestly, myself, I can never really understand why anyone would give this like a 10. Because the thing is, everyone seems to have a song they dislike on here. The thing with Mew is that after the song XYU, a lot of them think that they should have just chopped off the album there and just kept it at that, which is a viable criticism. There's a lot of ballads following that song. And one of the criticisms I'm giving is that there are way too many ballads on this album. And it's seriously for its deficit. And while Siamese Dream had like a ballad and then like a couple songs that were like really heavy, grungy, slow tunes, but they still had the grungy sound. They weren't necessarily ballads. And you can have ballads in your album. It's just has to be good. And it can't be the whole thing. Like, unless you're Nick Drake, you can't do a bunch of more low-key, sort of lo-fi songs like that. It just doesn't work that way. Another valid criticism on this album that I would actually totally agree with is just the differing styles clash quite a bit, especially on the second disc, which we'll get into. But I've been beating around the bush for a minute now. Who are the Smashing Pumpkins? Smashing Pumpkins really is Billy Corgan. He's the lead singer and lead guitarist, and he's been in the band the entire time. He's been the only member in the entire time, but the other members are core to the idea of the Smashing Pumpkins sound. You have James Iha on guitar, Jimmy Chamberlin on drums, and Darcy Retzky on bass, who didn't write some of the bass parts on this album, and I don't think she wrote any of them on Siamese Dream. So I don't know what that was about, but they are all valued members on this album, definitely. And Billy Corgan has been noted calling this basically meant to be the Wall for Generation X. Here's the thing. The Wall is kind of a masterpiece. Everyone kind of knows that. The way it blends art rock with prog, which it is a little distance from their other prog sounds, but you've got a lot of psych songs too. Obviously, Comfortably Numb is just amazing, and it's all just paced super well. There's tension when you need it. There's a moment of reprieve when it's not. Some really emotional, hard-hitting tracks. And the thing is, Mellon Collie isn't exactly the same. First of all, Mellon Collie as a concept album isn't really that. If you take the first disc, I myself actually totally interpreted that as a concept album, which went for its benefit. But then the second disc, that completely falls away until the last track, which really says, hey, you remember that opening track? And the thing is, this is the last album that the group had before they started splitting up. Because on tour, Jimmy Chamberlin the band kicked him out pretty much because he was addicted to heroin at the time, and he was just basically a liability for the group. So this album really was their send-off, and it was a change in sound, heavier than Siamese Dreams in a lot of senses, but also way lighter in other senses. So if you like diversity in your songs on an album, then that is technically to a benefit, but Smashing Pumpkins, they don't exactly hit all these on the head. So I've been covering a lot of backstory for this album because there is so much. Part of it comes from the fact that Billy Corgan dated Courtney Love after Kurt Cobain killed himself, supposedly. The fact that Billy Corgan was married at the time and the relationship was kind of failing. Mainly the fact that Billy Corgan, his childhood was just such a mess, pretty much. Those are all sort of key inspirations behind this album, which does make it somewhat relatable. And don't get me wrong, for the most part, that stuff hits, but there are definitely moments where they do not hit. And so I'm not going to beat around the bush any longer. We're just going to dive into the track list, see what has its merit and what doesn't. One last note before we start, though. The vinyl release of this album has a different track listing. Most of the songs are still there. They added a couple more, and I think they cut off the end of one and put it later in the album. And basically, the track list is all shifted around, but all the songs are there. So... And, you know, at some points it is for its benefit, where it does break up the monotony a little better, but also there are a couple songs that kind of have to go after the other, which, believe me, there are some pacing issues on this album, especially for the fact that this thing is huge, but I'm still digressing, so let's just get into the album. Now, the album actually starts off with an instrumental track, Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness, basically the opening track. Now, this is a very beautiful song filled with piano and strings, and it's just a really nice melody that really gets you into the zone. And the tone on this song is, in fact, melancholy, while being very, very beautiful, but not too dense, but you can tell that it doesn't quite exactly sound happy, which shows one of the best strengths of this album. For a good amount of the time, the tone is melancholy, and for most of it, it works pretty well. This goes into the next song, Tonight Tonight, which I've always been a fan of. It was one of the first Smashing Pumpkins songs I found. It's got this jangly guitar with these strings backing it. If you listen to this album for the first time with Siamese Dreams beforehand, these first two songs will sound completely alien to you. Like, what the heck are these symphonics? But you know what? Just accept that for what it is, and then you'll enjoy this. Now, the sound is very different, but it is definitely satisfying. The drum patterns are really just rolls on the snare, which kind of matches with the whole aesthetic of the song being kind of theatrical. The lyrics are some of Corgan's best. And of course, Corgan's nasal tone and slight off pronunciation, you know, it does what it's his style. And if you don't like it here, then a lot of spots in this album are going to be a massive struggle for you. And it isn't his best here. And that's just true. There are some songs where it works. This song, I don't think it works perfectly, but it's viable. So basically, the song is very good, and it totally works. The next song is Jelly Belly, which is a complete 180 in style. It's the super heavy, grungy, riffy track. And one of the strengths of this whole instrumental section here is that the bass tone is really thick underneath, and it's just chugging along with the guitar overhead. Works really well. I think the chorus has a rather uplifting chord progression that I think works really well for it. I think the lyrics on the song are pretty great for the most part, but one of the glaring flaws of the album is revealed here. This song is edgy, and I understand having some edge in your music. This was the 90s. Nu metal was becoming popular, for Christ's sake, so you could be edgy. Everything at this time was edgy. Spiderland, Nirvana, you name it. But it has not been dated very well. Now, some of the words are a little cliche, and that's where the edginess especially hits. It kind of reminds me of like some anime kid in like 2013 in the back of the class, you know, who brought a Death Note book to school, and he's like writing in it, being all edgy. But other than that, I actually think the song's pretty great. You just kind of have to accept it at a face value and just kind of ignore some of the other parts, but it's a pretty good song. And now we reach one of the best songs on the album, and also one of the shortest, Zero. You get this really noisy but kind of subdued opening riff. If you've heard it, you've heard it. It's the feedback is heavy, and this thing is squeaking. It is pretty incredible. This song is angry, it's ugly, and I love it. And the thing is, for some reason, despite it sounding kind of edgy, it never feels overboard. And I think this is pretty much where the album can reach its peak of edginess without seeming cringy. The next song is Here Is No Why. This song's kind of interesting. It kind of reminds me of the more slower tracks on Siamese Dreams. The lyrics are good and introspective, and it's got these chugs that just keep going. I think the mixing on this track is a little bit to its deficit, as some of the noise doesn't really hit until later, when it does eventually build. But the song is probably the weakest on the album so far. Fortunately, we are brought right back into that grungy classicness with Bullet with Butterfly Wings. Now, this song builds awesomely. It starts a little more calm with Billy Corgan with that opening line, "A world is a vampire," with the bass riff just building and the drums just being kind of scattered. And it's a good starting point. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. The chorus is great. It's a little repetitive, but it really tries to drive the point home, and it works. The second verse has some wah pedal action in there, which is pretty great. And this is one of the first songs on the album where Corgan uses some screaming in the background, which, he uses kind of sparingly, but this is one of the best times it's used. I adore the bridge on this track where it goes back to that subdued sound at the beginning. In fact, there was a live version where the way they did it kind of reminded me a bit more of the Siamese Dream style, which I thought made the song even better. The way it is pretty amazing still, and Corgan just keeps the song going off with his drones, and then I think either him or Eha has just got the wah just going back and forth. It's pretty awesome. The song is really great. Perfect teen angst. The next song is To Forgive, which is a slower and more introspective piece, and it kind of works well after Bullet, but honestly, some of the words are just a little cringe. For the message it's trying to convey here, there's like layered symphonics in the background, and it's just trying to build this great sound upon itself. And the thing is, it just doesn't match, and it feels a little self-indulgent, where it's trying to be like, look at me, and I'm like, I don't want to. I think the hook is pretty okay, but overall the song is, it's just fine. The next song is an ode to no one, aka F.U., and this is probably the edgiest the first disc gets, and it's a little cringe for that. It does have a cool build, and it does have a nice riff, but other than that, the song is kind of weak. I thought the outro was also pretty good, but other than that, the track just falls flat, and it doesn't get you in that emotional space that's kind of required here, and it's just not something I'm great with. The next track is Love, and it doesn't really pick back up where we left off. At this point in the album, this is the most experimental it gets, with this heavy layer of fuzz over everything. Don't think dope throne necessarily, but it is this thick distortion over the guitars, the drums, the bass, Billy Corgan's voice, which if you wanted to distort his voice, I would understand, but it doesn't work here. Yeah, it's kind of fun with the guitar solo, especially being all that heavy distorted sound, but other than that, it's just a little much for me. Also, the song ends like 4 times. The song ends, and then you hear like another chug, and then like a couple seconds later, another chug, and a few seconds after that, like another chug, but it's just since that time. It feels kind of like a joke, like the album's messing with me, and I'm not into it. Fortunately, the album picks up right now with the song Cupid De Lock. Now, this song is very different from what we've heard so far on this album. It's this kind of quirky harp-based rhythm. I don't know. I don't even know where to begin with the percussion here. It sounds alien. The lyrics are super cool, and the concept is incredibly interesting, where it matches, I think, some form of literature where basically Cupid and Death both have bows, and they switch arrows for the day, I think by accident. Yeah, this is a real sleeper hit for the Smashing Pumpkins. I don't know if they ever do this one live, but it's a fun song. The next song is Galapagos, and it is a ballad again, which the placement after Cupid isn't great because it sounds so generic in comparison, but it is an okay song in a vacuum. And this song has these beautiful guitar parts that feel reversed at points, which is very interesting. The builds do eventually lead to something, but they are not as satisfying as I'd like them to be, and the way they start off is just kind of flat. Next we reach one of my favorite songs in the album, Muzzle. Now, Muzzle has one of my favorite openers, with Corgan just like yelling out and then having the guitar in, and then everything layers on itself, and then it's just a super energetic intro. It's a really great way to start the song. I kind of like Jelly Belly. I like this song because it's noisy, but it also sounds uplifting at points. And if you look into the message, it's actually a Mellon Collie message, which totally works with the album. So far in the album, this is Corgan's strongest vocal performance. And following Muzzle, we get the longest track on the album, which is the long as hell, over 9-minute long Porcelina of the Vast Oceans. Yeah, the prog elements here are great. And after listening to this song so much with like subdued, really old car stereo audio, and then finally listening to it with the the Audio Technicas I have right now, the experience is amplified by a massive amount. It has this really slow build that turns into this chuggy riff that goes into a verse, and I don't know what I can say about the song that would make it sound unappealing, really. There's a fuzzy synth with these kind of tribal drums in the background. For once, the effects used on this track are really, really effective. Corgan screams for just a second towards the end, and it's very effective when it's implemented. And honestly, after looking more into the song, I would not be shocked if this was the track that inspired the entirety of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, because it's literally about like a dream woman who comes out of nowhere with crazy powers and just kind of saves you, which, you know, you can determine the impact of that for yourself. But in the context of Corgan's life, it's very great. Of course, it's twisted in the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, but I love it. And then the first disc ends with the track Take Me Down, which is actually sang by James Iha. This song is a spacey ballad, which you can say whether or not you like that there's another ballad here, but I like it here. And this song would have really ended the journey that Billy Corgan's character has taken so far, and I guess you could say there's a symbolic change by turning into James Iha, which, is not a perfect metaphor, but I think it works okay. And the song doesn't really floor me, and it doesn't really build to all that much. It's also a little short, and the instrumentals are kind of one note and not too interesting, but it would have made for a perfectly fine and cute ending here. But here's the thing. The album is only halfway over. So we get disc 2 kicked off with the track Where Boys Fear to Tread. You got this pretty great sort of grungy opening that kicks it off, and then this drags out to a really long intro that honestly isn't that necessary. It felt a little dragged on to me. Some of the lyrics here aren't the best, but I can forgive it for the most part. The song also doesn't have very much of a hook, but it does have a good riff. Yeah, there's nothing really offensive about this track, but it's just kind of whatever to me. The best part about it is that it goes into the next track, Bodies, very well. The track Bodies has these dark, grungy guitars that build really well. And the chorus on this song is nigh legendary, with Corgan yelping out "Love is suicide" over and over. You really feel it. The screams feel truly regretful here, and I'm not sure exactly why, but it didn't feel overly edgy to me. It felt like very connecting, and it felt a lot more regretful than just like angsty. There's a drum switch up towards the end, which was impactful and very great, and overall, this is just an emotionally gratifying song. The next song, I know I'm going to get some flack for this, but the next song is 33, and I gotta say, this is one of the most pointless ballads on the whole album. It is unnecessary, just this sort of jangly guitar track with some bell-sounding synths in the back. It's very whatever. The song doesn't do a single thing that hasn't been done before and better, and Corgan actually sounds like one of his worst parts here. Yeah, 33 is a cut for me. Unfortunately, the next track is even worse, In the Arms of Sleep. Corgan has this like glottal flip that he uses that's just really ugly with the rest of his voice, and the song's just boring, and its placement is like beyond unnecessary. Which after that, we reach the classic track, 1979. Now, everyone loves this song. Don't get mad at me, I think it is overrated. It is nowhere near the best Smashing Pumpkins song, but it's not bad. It is a perfectly reasonable and viable pick for the album, and it really helps the album. The somewhat electronic drum sound is pretty effective. It's got sort of a nostalgic sort of vibe to it. The lyrics are cool, and so is the instrumentation, especially where it gets kind of spacey during the chorus. It's probably the most shoegazy the album gets since Siamese Dream. The bass has some real punch on this track. Overall, the song's just a nice inclusion. Of course, I don't think it's a masterpiece, as some people do, but it's got all the punch it needs, and I like having it on the album. Unfortunately, the next track does not do this, and it is one of the weakest track placements on this album other than the ballads. This track is called Tales of Scorched Earth, and if you can't already tell, it's an edgelord's wet dream. This thing is covered in distortion, way more than any other song here, to the point where it's completely annoying. But I do love the opening riff, I must say. It's pretty thrashy and noisy, which is good, but after that, it just drops off, where you have Corgan just yelping over the whole thing, and I'm like, just stop it. There's some feedback loops that are kind of nice, I guess, but the lyrics are nonsensical and the song feels like total filler. I know Corgan probably would have described it as, oh, it's an unchained beast that we only let out every once in a while. I think you should keep it locked up. Now we reach a serious slow burner in the track Through the Eyes of Ruby. This one is over 7 minutes long. I thought the build for the beginning of this track was really strong. It's got these snare rolls that are really effective, and then it's followed by these more spacey sections. The song does kind of become another ballad at one point, which makes it feel entirely unnecessary amongst all these other ballads. Of course, the fact that it's this larger piece with a ballad kind of tucked in between is kind of cool, but it feels unnecessary. And for a 7-minute song, there's not much reason to keep that entire thing. The song does build up, I think, enough onto the second chorus, but the song doesn't really do anything new. The outro starts off pretty good, where it's this really gratifying instrumental part, but then the rest of it just feels kind of flat. Now, after this song, we get another ballad, Stumbling, and a lot of people can knock this track, but honestly, it is my favorite ballad on the whole album by a large margin. It is as a ballad should be. It's got this really rumbly, bassy acoustic guitar with just Corgan over it. It's this lo-fi and sweet song that's totally fulfilling. The song feels soft in a cold environment, and somehow Corgan's voice is completely fulfilling here. Unfortunately, the song is followed by XYU. Now, this isn't my least favorite track on the album, but oh my goodness, does it come close. And I'm probably going to get a little flack for that, but I think the song is a cringe fest. Oh my goodness, this thing just cannot help but make me cringe. First of all, the title. There are two interpretations I've seen of the title. It either means EX space WHY space YOU, which is like ex-girlfriend YU, which, hope you're ready for a grungy track about a breakup. It's not satisfying. Or the other interpretation I've seen is it's XYU, as in the alphabet would end in XYZ, except it always ends in U, because it's about codependency as well. It just sounds like a bad rap lyric, like something Eminem would have released recently. The intro starts off incredibly in your face, almost too much, but I do understand it's trying to be their heaviest track. It has this relatively standard Smashing Pumpkins riff. Choruses don't sound particularly great, and they actually get worse throughout the rest of the album because Corgan starts almost scatting over it. Apparently the song's really good live because they've done it over 300 times in front of an audience, but on the album it is just a cringe fest. Back to the chorus I was mentioning, Corgan just loves saying kaboom on this album. He says it in, I think, 3 of the 4 choruses. And then once the song goes through like 5 minutes or so, there's the bridge where he says, I stare into the eyes of the jackal and I say kaboom. It makes me cringe just thinking about it. And yes, I understand the jackal means Anubis and it means death. But what does exploding before death like even have in significance? Okay, you don't care about death, alright, you didn't care about death on like 8 of the songs on this album before, why should I care now? And I guess it's meant to be like him like blowing up or whatever. I'm not intimidated by Corgan on XYU, it's just not, it doesn't have the punch that it wants to. It's just, it feels like it's just slapping at me. In 2020, this thing aged terribly. Maybe back then it would have been like more impactful, but now I just think of some weak guy like breaking up with his girlfriend because, I don't know, she doesn't like Drain Gang or something. There is sort of a noise rock breakdown that's actually pretty sick on this track, but at this point I realized that the snare was off for this track. It's like it wasn't tightened. It's the Saint Anger snare that everyone loves to rag on, and it's not, this isn't a grindcore song, so it's not good here. The final guitar solo kind of sucks. I'm not even gonna lie. It feels absolutely pointless, and it feels like there's no chops behind it. And then the song just kind of ends. Not that it doesn't have a fulfilling ending, but it's literally just cut off, which, if that's symbolic for the lead character dying here, I don't care. It feels like some edgelord's like, you're not getting the whole song because you don't deserve it. I'm like, okay, I didn't want to hear it anyway. The next song is We Only Come Out at Night, and it's hard to really pin this one down. It's not necessarily a ballad. It's got this kind of quirky rhythm that's got this sort of like off-kilter drum beat. It's really interesting. This song feels totally wobbly, but it's kind of fun. It's one of Corgan's best metaphors on this whole album. Apparently, the rhythm is accompanied by a zither or a zither. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's this weird instrument with like 40 strings on it that you strum. Is the song kind of dumb? Yeah. Do I really like it? Yeah. The next song is beautiful, and this song's very hit or miss for me. It starts really weird. It's like a 90s R&B type beat. It feels bizarre. It wasn't totally terrible, but it does pick up actually. It gets a little more recognizable with a more rock-oriented Smashing Pumpkins song. Yeah, the song's just bizarre. It's really hard to truly pin down. It's really you just take it or leave it. Personally, I would have cut it, but it's up to you. And now, for an album that I guess needed 28 rather than 27 tracks, you reach, in my opinion, the most cuttable song, Lily, my one and only. And not just the most cuttable, the worst song of the album. And everyone kind of raves about the song, saying that it shows Smashing Pumpkins' humor, because it's about like a voyeurant or just a pervert watching from a tree to watch some woman, and then he gets arrested, and he's like, oh, I swear she waved you goodbye, which I guess as a song on its own, first of all, completely alien to the Smashing Pumpkins' typical grungy sound, or even the other sounds they've just went through here, but this sounds like a less good version of Maxwell's Silver Hammer that's about like a worse topic that's used in a much worse context on an album that's not nearly as satisfying. There's nothing fulfilling about this track. It's just a slap in the face for someone trying to get through this whole thing. It feels totally alien. For an album that's meant to be conceptual, yeah, you got the differing sound right, but it feels absolutely unnecessary. It's incredibly annoying when you're just trying to get through this absolute ocean of ballads on this section of the album, and then you just have this dumped on you. Like, I don't want to touch it. Unfortunately, the next 2 tracks after this one are ballads as well, but fortunately, they're both really, really good. The first one is by Starlight, which is a really sweet love song, and it does kind of pull you back into the concept album idea from the first album, where it's about his wife and how he thinks that even though they've been married, the relationship is kind of falling apart because they're just too damaged. And as long as you somewhat get the message here and don't just treat it as like another ballad, you'll be very satisfied with what you have. This leads us into the last song, Farewell and Goodnight, which, first of all, its placement in the band's history is really, really amazing, with the fact that they said goodnight and then the band just kind of stopped. This really is the closer to end all closers here. This is one of the best tracks on the album. Every person sings on this track, even Jimmy, which so far he's been the only band member to not sing on any track, and I don't think he sang on any track after this one either. And then after they all sing good night and they say that if you're a good person, I hope you have a good night, which is a little cryptic, I guess, but it's just a nice message. And then the piano that's been backing goes back into the original melody from Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness, which, despite disc 2 not having the best track listing, it ends really quite perfectly with this. So that is the entire track list. Monolithic, I am aware, and believe me, that does pull from the quality here. There are like 4, 5, 6, I'm gonna be honest, almost half the tracks on the second disc I would have cut, and I think 3 of them on the first disc I would have cut as well. And then you would have had an album that's like a 9, maybe. Not a guarantee. Not everything on here is perfect, even if you would have cut those songs. But those songs were definitely the weaker points. So there are high and lows aplenty on this album. There are some amazing tunes on here, but also a lot of weak ones. Honestly, too much filler. How can you even support the idea of a double album when there's filler on it? Way too many ballads. Like, this is Smashing Pumpkins here. We really don't want to have to deal with too many ballads. Some songs just don't belong. And I can appreciate the experimentation. On songs like Cupid De Lock, it works very well. And on We Only Come Out at Night, it also works pretty well. But other ones just do not fit. Also, the first disc is a seriously good amount better than the second disc. Like, just looking at the track list, you've got a lot more perfect songs on the first disc than the second. As well as the pacing, it works a lot better. It almost all seems to flow really consistently on the first disc. Not perfectly, but it totally works. The second disc, you've got here's a total ballad, and no escalation, you're just boom, XYU. And sometimes this album gets too edgy for its own good. And I gotta mention, there are some amazing riffs on here, some awesome switch ups. Overall, a lot of good stuff. To summarize this album in 2 words, I'd say inconsistent and overrated. And believe me, inconsistency is this thing's Achilles heel. But other than those 2 words, I would call it decent. So I bet you're all wondering what the rating is. I'm giving this a Weezer. No, I didn't steal this from the My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy review everyone knows Fantano did. I genuinely feel this is a 6 out of 10 album. So yeah, one of the main things about the inconsistency of this album is that normally with a concept album that works, but this isn't a concept album, and there is only so much sound the Smashing Pumpkins can explore with this idea before they run out of good ones. Which, this is a flaw with a few double albums. Stadium Arcadium is one that comes to mind as well. So yeah, if I'm gonna pick a Smashing Pumpkins album, I'm definitely sticking with Siamese Dreams. That thing is miles ahead of this album. It's even miles ahead of the first disc on this album. But yeah, what did you guys think? If you like this album or dislike it, go ahead and comment down below, or my social medias are linked. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on it. I'm totally open to hearing what you guys have to say. If you guys could like and subscribe, that would help my video and me out a whole lot. It's totally free, so don't feel bad if you're doing it. And yeah, that's it. I'll have some content out for you guys again soon, and I hope you guys have a good day.